Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2022. This is a reading event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, a resurrection of his 2021 event designed to celebrate Star Trek fiction in all its infinite variety and infinite combinations. And this year we're doing it in 2 installments instead of 5. We did the first month was August. That was the Wrath of Book Trek, where we talk about books inspired by the classic Roddenberry iterations of the show, all of the Star Trek shows that you would be familiar with from 20 years ago. And then September is Strange New Worlds, the Strange New Worlds part of Book Trek, which is not just about the so-called New Trek show that is called Strange New Worlds that just finished its first season, but also about all the other New Trek shows and any fiction that they may have inspired. Star Trek Discovery is the longest running and most infamous of them. Star Trek Picard, that brings Patrick Stewart back as his signature character, and it's about to wrap up. It will have its 4th and final season coming up. Star Trek Prodigy, which is a cartoon. Star Trek Lower Decks, which is also a cartoon. And Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is a big budget, more traditionalist New Trek show starring Christopher Pike and the Enterprise. So we are once again back to the Starship Enterprise. We didn't have that for Voyager. We didn't have that for Deep Space Nine. And we haven't had it for any New Trek. So we are now back to a version of Star Trek Enterprise. It's not the first Star Trek Enterprise from the show Star Trek Enterprise, the underdog Star Trek show that got canceled before its time. It's not Jim Kirk's Starship Enterprise, and it's not Captain Picard's Enterprise. It's in between Star Trek Enterprise and the original series. It's got a great cast, fantastic special effects, a beautiful, a wonderfully talented set designer, and some really interesting writing, even in the first season. And first seasons of these kinds of things are notoriously weak. The first season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds was indisputably a success. But it has yet to spawn a book, even one. So, and the other shows, Star Trek Prodigy has not spawned a book. Star Trek Lower Decks has spawned a comic book, but not any books that I know of. Star Trek Picard has spawned about 6 or 7 books, and Star Trek Discovery about 6 or 7 books. And I have read them all. And they're all, to one degree or another, dreadful. I mean, the ones that aren't just simply poor on their face are rendered poor by the fact that they are just addendums to the show. So that they might be interesting addendums to the show, but they don't work on their own. They don't work as books on their own, which takes away a lot of the enjoyment from me. And because they are largely bad, I've had to wonder, is the reason why they're largely bad just because the studio is maintaining a stronger stranglehold on the creative liberties that writers can take? Or is it that so-called New Trek doesn't have any fans? It certainly doesn't have enough of the Wild West Nielsen rating type infrastructure to justify creating books. Maybe that's why there's been hardly any. I went to fan fiction sites like Wattpad to look for New Trek fiction. I found a bunch of it. Not a lot of it very good, and quite a bit of it wanting to fix the problems in New Trek, which is a bad sign. If you were a showrunner or producer for New Trek, and in any of its variations, you should probably be disturbed by the fact that ardent fans, their first impulse is to fix what you've done. That's not a good sign. Some of it was interesting to read, but there's no real way to talk about it, which has left me kind of at 6s and 7s, because we're only a little bit past the halfway point in September. And I think that the reach of the second half of Book Trek 2022 very much exceeds its grasp. I think it does. It's fitting. We're dreaming big, as Star Trek used to do. But it doesn't leave me much to talk about if I'm making a swamp load of videos, and I am. My co-hosts are not. This is the reading event of the doomed. My co-hosts are largely hampered by non-BookTube outside real-world things, so the number of videos is fairly low, even compared to last year. But not by me. I never miss an opportunity to talk about Star Trek, except New Trek. I could talk about New Trek for the rest of September. I could make an hour-long video every day, and each one of those videos would be a different hour-long angry rant about what Alex Kurtzman and Akiva Goldsman have done to the franchise that they were given. They were handed the Star Trek franchise and were clearly told, do whatever you want with it. It's your own property. You didn't make any of it. You didn't establish any of the fandom. You're not fans yourself. Go ahead and do whatever you want to it. We absolutely do not care. That was no more Paramount's ethical right to do than it was their right to say, yay, okay, everybody's gay. Let's do that. It wasn't their right to do that. It wasn't Paramount's right to do that. But that is what has happened. And, you know, if you're hearing that from me, you might think, well, then how on earth can you say that Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the latest incarnation of New Trek, was a success? That's a whole discussion on its own. What is going on with Star Trek Strange New Worlds? My co-hosts, I have some Voxer mates, I've been talking about Star Trek on Voxer, and specifically Strange New Worlds. I have a deep-seated fourth-dimensional chess kind of conspiracy theory about Strange New Worlds. I think that its very success in hitting all the right notes with traditional Star Trek fans, that very success was done mockingly, I believe. I believe that the writers and producers, the showrunners especially, who are handing all these things to fans that they know the fans want, are doing it with sheer spitting contempt. Look at this, we can get the SEALs to clap, is a phrase that, it's probably apocryphal, but I have heard that was used in a meeting about Strange New Worlds. Let's see if we can get the SEALs to clap. I don't know if that's true. Probably not. It's on the nose for a comic book villain, so it could either be completely apocryphal, or it could be somebody who spends all day on Twitter, since they tend to talk like comic book villains. The fact that the possibility that could have been served up in mockery of me and original fans like me made me really hesitant to just say, well, mockery or not, I'm enjoying it. Because nobody wants to be made a fool of like that. And I still largely believe that is the case. If there's one way to know if I'm right, when I make one of my crackpot, old man yells at clouds predictions, I always like to give you a way to test whether or not my prediction is true. And I have a way. There is a way to predict whether or not that conspiracy theory is true. And it's very simple. If my conspiracy theory is true and the first season of Strange New Worlds was served up mockingly to original fans in a way to say, look at this, we know what bigots they are, we know what they'll like, then the second season of Strange New Worlds will start very strong, very early, to introduce the weird, radical leftist, blue checkmark Twitter nonsense that is the soul and essence of Star Trek Discovery, and that has made fans absolutely revile it. They will start to enter that into the show. They didn't quite do it for the first season. It's barely there at all in the first season. No one in the course of the first season of Strange New Worlds, for instance, suggests openly that Christopher Pike, the captain of the Enterprise, shouldn't be captain because he's a man. There might be veiled talk, little hints here and there that maybe he's psychologically crippled because he knows his own future and knows that his doom is coming, and that maybe that psychologically cripples him. There are a couple of joking comments about how maybe he needs to expand his imagination, but none of the outright misandry that fills Star Trek Discovery, none of the outright bigotry that is the sole essence of that show. If I'm right, if my prediction is right, that Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1 is essentially an elaborate Trojan horse, then those are the Greek warriors that will emerge from that Trojan horse in Season 2. We shall see. I hope I'm wrong. But either way, whether I rant about New Trek or I guardedly assess Star Trek Strange New Worlds, we could talk a lot about the details of what went on there in that season. Whether I do that or not, I'm not talking about books, which is sort of trouble for Star Trek, for Book Trek 2021. But then I thought of a loophole that Vin at Revenant Reads came up with. I mentioned it in an earlier video. He came up with an extra away mission for Book Trek, which is in addition to reading Star Trek fiction, you could read science, works of science nonfiction, which the old Roddenberry era Star Trek loved and championed. Star Trek Discovery very much does not love it. The current showrunners of Star Trek have contempt for scientific advancement, for scientific literacy. They are, in other words, in addition to anything darker, like maybe being on Twitter so much that they actually think it's sexist or even colonialist to say that 2 + 2 = 4. I wouldn't put it past some of the people connected with this show to actually be in the group of Twitter blue checkmarks that says that. But it's not only that, it's also that ultimately what I'm saying is they're writing bad science fiction. There wasn't as much of that in Strange New Worlds, but it has been endemic in the rest of New Trek. So it makes this away mission a little more, poignant. And I'm doing that today, and I think I might do that for the rest of the week, for the upcoming week. Just talk about science books, because Vin gave an outlet. I don't think he thought that it was going to be this. I don't know that he thought that he had a co-host who would read all of New Trek books and not find anything worth talking about in any of them. But, so I found a popular science book. I have recommended it on this channel many, many times. I want to recommend it again. It is an unbelievably strong recommendation. It's Charles Pellegrino's book, Ghosts of Vesuvius, which is about disasters, and it's about uncovering disasters. It's about the ongoing process of trying to figure out how disasters work. So you have the last days of Pompeii, and you've got there a classic iconic image and Pompeii in the background. This is the paperback. But you also have How Towers Fell. And this was written in 2004, and that's a direct reference to the 2001 terrorist attacks on Lower Manhattan and the Pentagon, which Pellegrino examines in forensic, physics-oriented detail. How those things actually worked. And the juxtaposition of a very famous old catastrophe that we're trying to understand through its physical remains, and a very famous new catastrophe that we really only can understand from its physical remains, is utterly fascinating. Just utterly fascinating. Of course, the one element that we have for the 9/11 terrorist attacks that we don't have for Pompeii is a visual record. We have a visual record, and I firmly believe, I know this is, again, a crackpot conspiracy theory. In this case, I think I'm on pretty solid ground. I think there's 10 times the visual footage pertinent to the attacks of that day than anything that the public has seen. I think that the visual record is probably 10 times longer. I certainly believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that whatever hit the Pentagon was extravagantly filmed. Many different angles, many very clear-cut pieces of tape, not the tiny little thing that we got, that was released to the public. I firmly believe that, but I bet there's a lot of other stuff, too, that has been recovered, and that just hasn't been made public, and that hasn't been able to be pried loose from the government by Freedom of Information Acts. And I say that, there's a visual record for the 9/11, for the Twin Towers falling, that doesn't exist for Pompeii, but there is an utterly remarkable YouTube video. It must be in millions of hits by now. If I remember, I'll try and find it. If you haven't seen it, and you're at all interested in the eruption of Vesuvius and the burying of Pompeii and Herculaneum, you really should watch this video. It sets a so-called camera on the rooftop of just an ordinary building in Pompeii. Vesuvius is in the distance, about that far away. And it just sits there and follows through what happens in the next 3 weeks. Sometimes hour by hour, sometimes day by day, and all according to the very latest volcanology, the very latest understanding that we have of what it would have looked like to sit there right in that spot and watch. Of course, the citizens of Pompeii didn't do that. They had no idea what was going on, and by the time they figured out what was going on, it was too late to escape what was going on. One thing that people who are maybe unfamiliar with volcanic eruptions don't understand is the speed of them. The speed is astonishing. Not just pyroclastic flow, the stuff that comes out of the volcano, which can travel much, much faster than John Cusack can in a car in an action movie. 5 times as fast, 10 times as fast. There's no chance that you're going to outrun it. But also, the ejecta that goes up into the air, that I'll try to remember to link to that video. It's as close as we're ever going to get to visual record of the eruption of Vesuvius. But Pellegrino looks at these things from a a mechanical standpoint. He looks at the oddities of them and tries to figure out what's going on. Like, for instance, that in the immediate wake of the 9/11 attacks, 3 blocks over from the Twin Towers, you would find the drawer of a filing cabinet full of documents. So no sign of the cabinet, no sign of the other drawers, but the documents in this one drawer are not only still in place, but still in immaculate alphabetical order. That's the one item of a filing cabinet was blasted free of that cabinet and kept intact. What are the physics behind that? How does that work? How did any of this happen? How did anybody survive? People walked out of the towers, including a group of people, who walked out just as the tower they were walking out of started to collapse, so they had to run for it. A few other people, very famously, survived in a collapsed stairwell when the building collapsed around them. What is the physics behind that? He does a great job of looking at that and juxtaposing it with Vesuvius, and I swear, every page of this is fascinating. Talk about making history come alive. It's painful, maybe. For Americans, certainly, the deconstruction of the Twin Towers collapse will be painful, but utterly fascinating. I want to read you just a bit of what he is like. This is him talking about Pompeii. For more than a century, textbook dogma had dictated that the Pompeians had suffocated under the fallout, the ejecta that I talked about. But Sigurdsson and Carey, those are 2 archaeologists, did not see eye to eye with the textbooks, partly because very few bodies had ever been found under the fallout, which would happen. If you suffocated, you would be underneath it. Most of the casualties were located on top of the pumice, which did not surprise Halildur, for he had never understood how chilled pumice was supposed to have been lethal in the first place. The pumice is the sort of rain of rocky dust, and dirt, and rocks and material that coagulates from the ejecta of the plume of the volcano. The largest particles of sponge stone at the onset of the Pompeian catastrophe were barely wider than acorns, and they were made mostly of air. Alongside the pumice stones, starting at the bottommost Pompeian ash layers, fell equally small fragments of pulverized black rock called lithics. These comprise between 2 and 10% of the deposit, and they teach us that the nozzle through which ash was being ejected was eroding wider and wider with each passing hour. Some of the fossilized citizens of Pompeii were holding pillows over their heads, not over their faces, over their heads. Some of them tied pillows to their heads. While low-density nuggets of sponge stone could scarcely sting, the lithics had terminal velocities of up to 120 miles per hour. They fell from the sky like random volleys of slingshot ammunition, breaking roof tiles and threatening to shatter skulls. As the people went into the streets or evacuated through the city gates, they protected their heads as best they could with leather helmets or pillows and blankets. Their fossilized remains give testimony to this. So too do the letters of Pliny the Younger, who famously saw Vesuvius erupt from across the Bay of Naples. Thank you for asking me to send you a description of my uncle's death, began a letter written between AD 103 and 107 to the historian Tacitus by Pliny the Younger. It is true that he, that is his uncle, Pliny the Elder, perished in a catastrophe which destroyed the loveliest regions of the earth. Pliny recounts that his uncle was in command of the Roman fleet at Misenum, 20 miles west of Vesuvius. From his vantage point at Misenum, the younger Pliny, then 17 years old, witnessed and documented the eruption. Pliny gives us the date and time at which the fallout phase began, a phase commonly called the Plinian phase by volcanologists in honor of the Plinies. According to Pliny, near midday on August 24th, shortly after lunch, his mother drew attention to a cloud of unusual size and appearance rising from Vesuvius 20 miles away in the east. Its appearance was described by Pliny the Younger as being like an umbrella pine, for it rose to a great height on a sort of trunk and then split off into branches. Corroborating the pumice record, he appears to describe stratospheric winds cutting through the tops of the cloud, pulling it apart into longer streamers of fallout, eastbound, where, borne down by its own weight, the fallout spread out and gradually dispersed. Sometimes it looked white, sometimes blotchy and dirty. And it just goes on like that. That is immediately gripping nonfiction writing. And it just goes on like that. Page after page, the whole book. So in terms of my escape clause for Book Trek 2022 for September, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to recommend Ghosts of Vesuvius. You will love it. If you have the slightest taste for this sort of thing, you will love it. And also, I know we're a little early for nonfiction November, but this is also one of the books that I hand to people who say that they can't get into nonfiction. There are a large number of books out there that are absolutely silver bullets when it comes to that. You won't be able to resist, and this is one of them. So there you go. We're going to talk about, we talked about popular science instead of Strange New Worlds. Because I don't want to just rant against New Trek, and I don't want to just talk about Strange New Worlds. Although, a couple of episodes where we just chat, I'd love to get one of my co-hosts on to talk about Strange New Worlds, but they are all enveloped in Pompeian-style catastrophes of their own. So we'll see. The month's not over. So, but in the meantime, that is your Book Trek check-in for today. It's not Star Trek. It's popular science. I will see if I can maybe find something Star Trek to talk about tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.